This is Autoline After Hours with John McElroy and Gary Vasilash, episode 570 for September 9th of 2021. Munich, Tesla, and winding down ICE ops. Watch Autoline After Hours live at Autoline.tv every Thursday at 3 p.m. Eastern Time. That's 12 p.m. Pacific. You can subscribe to this podcast for free by searching for Autoline in iTunes, Stitcher, or YouTube.
Autoline After Hours is brought to you by Bridgestone Tires, solutions for your journey, and by Borg Warner, propulsion solutions that support a clean, energy-efficient world.
Mr. Gary Vasilash.
John, how are you? Jet-lagged?
I'm good. How about
Not
yourself?
jet-lagged. Well, I'm doing just fine. Just fine. So you were in Munich this week.
I was.
We're
We
going
got
to
to
talk about that
on the show today.
And I was in Plano, Texas this week.
And you cannot talk about that today.
I cannot talk about that today. We'll talk about that in a future show. But yeah, so we're both here. We're both doing the show. That's good. So this means I've got to ask you a question about what went on 9/9/66. You realize that if you flip those over, they'd still be the same?
Yeah. I did not realize that.
All right. So Lyndon Baines Johnson, who was the president of the United States at that time, did something on September 9th, 1966. What did he do?
Wow.
And you get really, really big bonus points if you get the whole thing right.
Uh-oh. So he signed some legislation?
Yeah.
Okay. I'm going to guess it must have had, I'm just guessing, of course. I'm going to say it was like the first rudimentary attempt at a Clean Air Act.
Close, but no cigar. So he created the National Traffic and Motor Vehicle Safety, or he signed the National Traffic and Motor Vehicle Safety Act, which established the National Highway Safety Bureau, which we now know today as the National Highway Traffic and Safety Administration. So the issue that he was dealing with was not clean air. The issue he was dealing with was that there were like massive vehicular deaths that had been going on. And when he signed the bill, he said that over the previous Labor Day weekend, 29 soldiers had died in battle. You remember the Vietnam War was in earnest then. And 614 Americans died on the roads.
Yeah. Boy, I want to say if we still had the same fatality rate today as we did back then, there'd be over 100,000 people killed in motor vehicle accidents every year just in the U.S.
And if there was those kind of numbers, we wouldn't have a show that's about the auto industry.
Boy, isn't that the truth?
So let's bring in Chris Paukert of Roadshow by CNET.
Hey guys,
How are you?
Good to see you.
Good to have you back.
Yeah, it's good to be talking to you in the same time zone again.
I know.
In our
Yeah.
time zone.
Yeah. Chris and I were just at the Munich. I want to call it Auto Show, but they called it Mobility Show. And I think that's more accurate of a description of what that show was all about. It wasn't your, pre-COVID kind of car show. It's kind of a post-COVID mobility thing.
All right. So I know we're going to talk about cars, but you guys were there and you were on the ground. You saw what was going on. And I read something in Deutsche Welle, which is basically like the BBC in Germany. And let me read this. And it's about the IAA that it happened in Munich. It said, the exhibition grounds are nowhere near fully booked. 3 of the 12 halls are completely empty. 3 others are filled with vintage cars and lots of bicycles. That should at least go down in IAA history because there are more bicycle manufacturers and car manufacturers at the start in Munich. But, and this is the new thing about the IAA concept, it no longer wants to focus on the car, but primarily on urban mobility. So was that your sense of things, that A, there were not that many cars, and B, there were a whole lot of bicycles?
That's not inaccurate.
Yeah, I to be honest with you, I didn't see it. Some of the bicycle halls and a lot of the sort of alternative mobility things, although they were sprinkled in on the main floor in a lot of locations too. But I think we've been seeing that trend creep in over the years anyway, as more and more companies want to be viewed as mobility providers and less as auto companies, and the same things go for the shows. It's probably more acute here. I guess I don't really feel like I had a baseline to say how it feels, in part because this is an entirely new venue for us. Normally, historically, this has been the Frankfurt Motor Show, which we know to be this sprawling leviathan of a show. And so this was a completely different feel because it was in a different place.
Yeah, the Munich Messe, which is what they call their conference centers, is huge. I mean, to Chris's point, it's not as big as the Frankfurt show, but the Frankfurt show is a hodgepodge of different buildings that have been built up over the decades. And man, to walk from one end to the other, honest to God, I think it's a mile from one end to the other. And so if you wanted to go from the Mercedes display to the BMW display, it was a 2-mile round trip walk. It was way too big. And the one in Munich is much more compact, although, like I said, it's big. It's kind of this H pattern kind of building with long halls, as they call it. Each hall is, I don't know what the size is, but a pretty good size hall. And I would say it's true. 2 of them were filled with bicycles and other micro mobility kind of machines. Some others were filled with, those miniature little European tuner companies that, make all kinds of parts and components for go fast kind of cars. And there were not a whole lot of automakers there. Mercedes had a pretty good sized display. BMW did a pretty good job. And they both took the show seriously. They introduced new cars there. I think Mercedes had 4 new models that they unveiled. BMW had 1 and Mini had 1. Renault also took it pretty seriously. They had the Megane Electric, and they had a future version of the Renault 5, known as Le Car in the U.S. market, if you remember that. And who else? Ford had a little display. Hyundai had a little display. And Great Wall Motors out of China is launching 2 new brands in Europe. One called WEY, Way, that's hybrid cars. And then in a total separate hall, to keep the brands distinct, they have another all-electric brand called Aura. And I think that was it, Chris, or am I missing any car company that? Oh, Volkswagen. Volkswagen was there, but it was the only brand in the whole group. There was no Audi, no Porsche. It was just Volkswagens, and all they were showing was the ID stuff, which we've already seen before.
Okay, so let me, before you answer this, I just want to get a sense, to put this in a perspective for people who may be familiar with the Detroit show and the Chicago show, or the LA show and the Chicago show. Okay, so it has always been the sense that there's lots of space in the Chicago show, that the booths are much larger because McCormick Place is a big exhibition space. And the other venues, they're tighter, they're more crowded, and so on. I mean, did you guys get the feeling that if Frankfurt was Detroit or LA or New York, that Munich was Chicago?
I don't know that I would say that. In part because, Chicago is such a big venue with mostly in large kind of monovolume spaces. And this show is sort of spread out differently and arranged differently. It, in certain ways, to me, it felt more like a Frankfurt show because there were so many different buildings, but they were closer together. To John's point, you didn't need a shuttle bus to run from one end to the other, which they actually have those in Frankfurt. This almost felt a little bit more CES-like to me because in part the displays were a lot smaller and more modest in ambition, I think. Mercedes had a pretty good-sized traditional auto show display, but they had 2 levels actually in one part. But a lot of the other displays, like Ford's display, looked like it might have been a regional auto show display at the Cleveland Motor Show or Little Rock or something like that. So you ended up with a lot more smaller displays, and a lot of additional little vendors kind of mixed in there.
But, the thing that strikes me is, both of you have mentioned the Mercedes booth. And for our viewers who haven't been there, Mercedes used to have a giant building in Frankfurt. I mean, and again, a multi-floor building that you had to take escalators to get to the top of. I mean, it was a huge footprint. And, you would have BMW and Audi, they would create their own giant structures that would be standalones. I mean, what it was a just a phenomenon that descended on that city whenever the Frankfurt show occurred. And I'm just again trying to get back to this thing of whether we're seeing a significant shift in what we'll be seeing going forward in terms of auto shows. I mean, here in a couple of weeks, there'll be the Motor Bella in Pontiac, Michigan, put on by the people that ordinarily put on the North American International Auto Show. And, there will be a place where they're going to, they're saying they're going to be 400 vehicles on 87 acres. And there's going to be the 1.5 mile track that people take rides on and so on. So it becomes an entirely different thing than a traditional auto show. It sounds to me like Munich maybe was sort of a traditional auto show, but they were just trying to mix it up in terms of the properties that were being displayed.
Now, here's the thing. Auto shows, as we used to know them, are dead. I mean, it's over. We're not going back to the way that they used to be. And this was happening before COVID. COVID just accelerated everything. And so what the car companies didn't like doing, you mentioned that big Mercedes-Benz building where you had to take escalators to the various floors in it to look at all the displays. That cost them a fortune. They don't want to spend that kind of money. BMW had a building at Frankfurt that was so big, they had a test track inside that you could get in and drive around in. They're not going back to that ever again. They don't need to spend that kind of money. They wanted, all this, splash and theater, because that was good for the TV cameras. They loved that kind of coverage. But now they can deliver the same kind of content online for a fraction of the cost, get immediate results, measure it much more accurately. And so the auto shows as we knew it, they're gone. They're dead. They're never going to recover.
I think that's certainly true. I think that's certainly true as media events. A lot of automakers can get a lot more bang for their buck doing individual day events and flying in people and owning the news cycle that day. To me, seems like that's a much more effective model a lot of times than spending $1 million on just a press conference, let alone all the other things that you have to bring into it. So I think John is right about that. I think the other aspect that's changed is automakers and other mobility companies want to have more of an experiential quality to it. So not just the experience of riding up and down those escalators in some of those halls, but actually getting demo rides or some hands-on things. So things like Motor Bella, where there's, test tracks or autonomous vehicle demonstrations or something like that. Well, I think we're going to see more and more of that type of thing. And indeed, they did try to do some of that in Munich. I think there were some offsite things like the Audi Grand Sphere concept and some other things were not located in the main hall. So they're trying for that.
Yeah, no, that was downtown. It wasn't even anywhere near the show. And they did have test tracks out behind the building in Munich where you could ride mountain bikes and other side micro mobility kind of things. My real question is, the public days start Saturday. And I'm just curious if the public's going to show up and what their expectations are going to be, because I think most people going to an auto show, they want to be wowed by the cars. And you're going to have all these people coming in from Germany to look at the show, and they're going to go, well, where's the Porsches? Where's the Ferraris? Where's the Rolls Royces? Where's the fill in the blank? They're not going to want to look at bicycles and suppliers with, displays of their latest LiDAR or something like that. That's just not going to interest the public.
See, and that gets me back to my question, Jen, about, if you're somebody who is used to going to see the Mercedes building, if you're somebody who's used to seeing the giant BMW display, and you come in and you see what are impressive, but in context, modest presentations, aren't you going to begin to wonder about these companies going forward?
I don't know if I'd wonder about the companies, but I'd wonder, am I ever going to come back to an auto show? I mean, if I'm general public, right? And I go looking around and it's like, there isn't a whole lot of cool cars to look at. There was some good stuff. And I should preface this all by saying the Munich show was bigger than I thought. It had some more interesting things than I thought it would, and it was better attended than I thought it would be. But I think when the general public gets there, they're going to go, was ist los? Where is all the cars?
Well, so I think the other thing about it too is we have to remember that it was sort of touch and go with this show. We were all checking with each other, like, do you think this is actually going to happen? As recently as a week, ahead of the show. And I'm sure there was a lot of hedging of bets at automakers about what to reveal and what to invest. So I think, this is basically a first draft, first shot for this show. I'm willing to kind of give it the benefit of the doubt for now. And maybe the next couple of shows, hopefully in a post-COVID era, we'll see a fuller vision of what they had in mind.
Totally agree, Chris. Totally agree. And I'll say the same for Motorbella. I'm going to cut them a lot of slack too. I cut Munich a lot of slack as well. It's the first time. I mean, they're trying to learn how to do this all differently. And so, I've got things I can critique about it. But by the same shot, I hope they can take what they've got and build on it in the years to come.
John, but from what you were saying, I was getting the impression that you thought that there wouldn't be a second opportunity, not a second act, that basically that they're going to be going, maybe we should have regional shows. Maybe we should just do this in, Wolfsburg or Stuttgart. And oh, by the way, this is just Mercedes and Volkswagen, right?
Yeah, no, you're right, Gary. That's me, John McElroy talking. I'm going to cut them slack, and I hope they can build on it. The general public may not be as forgiving as I am.
Okay, so let's move on to some of the vehicles that you saw. So, Chris, what impressed you the most? Which vehicle did you see that you thought, wow, this is really, really something that I need to pay attention to?
I'm going to go actually with a surprise pick, at least for me, the iVision Circular from BMW, which is sort of their look at a vehicle from 2040. And I say that not because I thought it was particularly visually attractive or that I even associate the type of vehicle, which is sort of an urban bubble with a brand like BMW, but because it was sort of a whole cloth approach, very thoughtful redesign of cars with the idea of sustainability in mind, going down to the fact that they didn't have badges on the vehicle and they used basically etching instead, because they're really trying to look at the total impact, the environmental impact of the vehicle, every part of the process. They want it to be 100% recyclable. And I thought it was a really interesting vehicle. Again, not my cup of tea visually, but pretty interesting and thoughtful the way that they look at it. I think the theme for the whole show, actually, everybody's got EVs, everybody's talking AVs, and they've been doing it for years. Was sustainability, in a more holistic approach, your supply chain, the traceability of things, and they talked about that some, and we ran into that sort of theme with other automakers too.
Yeah, I think what's interesting about that iVision Circular notion is the fact that BMW has been under some criticism for not being a leader in terms of EVs. And one of the arguments that they're making to counter that is that we're looking at sustainability across all of our processes. We're not just looking at, the use of the vehicle, because there's a whole lot more, carbon emitted in other parts of things. And so, they're saying that we're going to use 100% recycled material. And oh, by the way, 100% of that material can be recycled again. So there'll be, further use, which gets back to the name circular. So they're talking about a circular economy. And I thought what was very interesting is Oliver Zipse, who is the head of BMW. He made a very interesting point saying that, anybody who thinks that commodity materials are going to be very readily accessible is going to be in for a rude awakening, because we're seeing, the prices of steel is just exploding. And so whereas recycled materials have historically been a little bit more expensive or quite a bit more expensive, they're taking the point of view of, going forward, we may need to be using these materials. And so, you have this 100% view of what is involved in terms of emissions from a vehicle. But John, you were going to say something.
Yeah, I really like this, the BMW Circular. So we don't have a picture here. So anybody watching the show right now, do a search online, BMW Circular, and the pictures will pop up. But I really like the styling of it. I've been a huge critic of BMW styling. I think the i4, the iX, ho hum. I don't think they set any new ground. You know, BMW's been wedded to this kidney grill. And so on its electric cars where you don't need a grill whatsoever, they have this, I think, a garish plastic applique of a grill that they slap on the front end. To me, it's lazy styling. And like I said, I've been criticizing them. So when that circular rolled out on stage, I was like, Yahoo! You're finally doing it. You know, you're throwing away all your form language and going with something totally new. Now, they have not given up on the BMW kidney, but the shape of the whole front end is that kidney. And I thought it was extremely clever, the way that they did that. And Gary, I'd take issue with people criticizing BMW for not being a leader in electric cars. The i3 was way early. And remember, and this is where I'm skeptical about their whole circular economy thing, because remember, the i3, all carbon fiber, this was going to revolutionize how cars are built. BMW is going to be so far out in front of everybody else. They established their own carbon fiber manufacturing factory in Moses Lake, Washington, because that was going to be so green with all the hydropower and blah, 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 blah. Here we are years later. The i3 was a total flop. They sold Moses Lake. They're not making anything out of carbon fiber anymore. So take what they're talking about in terms of a circular economy and how they're going to do things so great with a grain of salt. But kudos to them for the styling of that circular concept car. I thought it was sensational.
So you're speaking about the ugly grills that have been used on some of the electric BMWs. So I saw the concept EQS SUV EV from Mercedes, a new Maybach. I think that has the ugliest grill on it since the Daewoo Leganza.
I'm with you on that. I mean,
man,
yeah.
Well, those cars and those buyers are not often about subtlety. You know, those are the guys with the Bulgari watches, you know, or the Richard Mille watches that are just massive and encrusted with things. So having those big ostentatious grills make more sense to me in a context like that, as opposed to, you know, like BMW on its 4 Series coupe, which I agree with you, John, I think is just absolutely hideous looking. I'm not that type of buyer. So with the Maybach, you know, I didn't really care for the exterior styling. I thought the interior was quite striking. And I'm sure it'll reach its target audience. I'm sure it'll be just fine.
I don't think so. I think big grills jumped the shark a couple of years ago. And I think the German luxury automakers were the last to come out with gigantic grills. They got to the party too late. That's so passé. I think, and now they're committed to it, right? That's going to be in their next design cycle for what, at least the next 5 years. So I think they've made a huge mistake from that standpoint.
I hope you're right. I'm still seeing a lot of big grills on Genesis stuff too. Not everything, but I really hope you're right, because functionally it makes less sense than ever.
It really does. And Gary, what was the Mercedes SUV that you mentioned?
well, that was the EQS.
Oh, okay.
That is the name of the thing.
The Maybach, yeah. And then there was
Yeah.
the EQG, which is like the electric G class.
Yeah,
Right.
the EQG, like you said, it's a G-Wagon electrified. It's all retro. I understand that. I think, you know, I'll cut some slack for Mercedes to do that. But yeah, the rest of their electric stuff, I'm not impressed with from a styling standpoint.
Yeah, I agree with you. Some of them are a little too melted bar of soap, you know, with the big applique type grill that probably hides a bunch of sensors behind them. But I hear that the new S-Class is wonderful to drive. I haven't driven it yet. I have.
It's fantastic.
Yeah.
It's really good. Man, is it complicated. I mean, you need a PhD in owner's manual to do anything with that car. It's very hard just to get in that car and drive. You know, we were talking about this the other day. I get in it and I'm driving along. All of a sudden, something pops up on the instrument cluster that says, move the steering wheel and the seat until 3 dots appear above the screen. And I'm like, what the F is this about? And now I don't know what to do. How do I get rid of that screen? And I'm start pushing all the buttons. There's a lot of buttons on the steering wheel. I start pushing all of them until that goes away. And then I brush something else, and instead of looking at the radio screen, I'm looking at a keyboard. And I was like, how do I get rid of the keyboard? I want to see the nav, or I want to see the radio. I never figured that out. The only way I could figure it out was stop the car, turn the engine off, turn it back on again. I mean, literally, you got to study that owner's manual for a couple of days before you can drive that car.
Well, that's definitely disheartening to hear.
And so what do you think the odds are that the demographic that are going to buy the S-Class are going to spend 2 days reading the owner's manual?
Not at all. And look, the car is fantastic. I mean, wow, does it ride well? Wow, it's so refined. It's so beautifully crafted, but it's very, very complicated.
And what was the MSRP on that?
143,000 on the one that I drove.
Mm-hmm. It probably ought to be pretty good for that.
Yeah.
Yeah. Hey, I'm in a $108,000 Jeep this week, so
Yikes.
140 is not terrible, I guess.
Yeah.
In the new world economy.
So John, you mentioned the Magan E-Tech Electric, which is its official name. I like that, E-Tech Electric. And I was reading about that, and there was something that goes back to when we had the show with Joyson, and they were talking about the blade that was pyrotechnically deployed to cut the lines for the batteries.
That was cool. I thought that was brilliant.
Yeah, and so this new Renault has what is called the Fireman Access Innovation that was developed by Renault along with French firefighters. It makes a special access area for rescue teams to utilize when trying to quickly douse a battery fire. Now get this, meaning it can quench the flames in 5 minutes as opposed to 1 to 3 hours that it used to take. Okay,
Yeah.
A vehicle that's on fire for 1 to 3 hours, is there anything left?
No, it's burnt. You just see this body in white, a charred body in white is what's left.
So is a sufficient amount of attention being paid to the fact that battery fires are so hard to douse?
I mean, we've been dealing with this issue to some extent since hybrids came along, and they were doing special trainings for local fire and rescue teams to learn how to cut into vehicles with the jaws of life and have battery disconnects. And this is sort of that, maybe on steroids a little bit. I think there's a QR code on the vehicle, on the windshield or something, that emergency workers can scan, and then they get like the blueprint of the car and like cut here, don't cut here, that sort of stuff. And that's all smart. But I think, battery fires have become an increasingly large issue that we've been hearing about, obviously, with LG stuff and the Bolt EV. So I think there's a lot of attention being paid to it. How much of it is actually being done on a design level that people want to talk about is another question. I think that a lot of that sort of stuff may be present in other vehicles, other EVs, but it's maybe not publicized as much because you don't really want to get people thinking about the fact that fires last 1 to 3 hours.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, this is something very interesting that Renault has done. It's an access panel that allows firemen to shoot water directly inside the battery. So instead of hosing down the whole car, you go right inside the battery, which I'm sure the battery engineers are pulling their hair out, leaving access for this kind of a thing. But I think the real answer is probably what CATL is doing, and they're going with the LFP, right? It's lithium phosphate iron or lithium iron phosphate, whatever. I think they're not as efficient, so you need a bigger battery to maintain the same kind of range, but they don't burn. And I think that's going to be the answer, is going with a battery chemistry that is far less likely to catch fire.
So speaking of EVs and not on fire, just a new introduction there. Did you guys see the ID Life, the Volkswagen small car?
Yeah, it was sort of a stripped down, almost kind of like a modern electric Volkswagen thing in a way, but not quite as charismatic. But I thought it was kind of fun. It's, low cost. I think that one had a canvas roof, but I don't think we'll have any chance of seeing it in the US. If we want to talk about little EVs that are fun and retro styled with a canvas roof, I'm all in on the Microlino 2.0, which is a little BMW Isetta looking thing.
Yeah, that to me was the coolest looking car there. But again, this is for Europe only. It would never pass U.S. crash standards. In fact, it won't even pass European crash standards. But in Europe, you can have micro cars that are allowed to drive on the roads, I think on roads with speed limits up to 45 miles an hour. And they don't have to meet the crash standards and all that. So I love the Microlino. I thought that was really cool. Like Chris says, it's like a modern day version of the BMW Isetta. But even in Europe, it's going to sell in very small numbers.
It's interesting to me that, you guys saw a whole bunch of electric vehicles. And Chris, you were saying that part of the theme that seemed to be sustainability, electrification, and so on. And so I read a quote from the Director General of the European Automobile Manufacturers Association, who said, quote, consumers will not be able to make the switch to zero emission vehicles if there are not enough charging and refueling stations along the roads where they drive. They came out with statistics that said 10 countries in the EU do not even have one charger over 100 kilometers of roadway. And, so he said, if citizens of Greece, Lithuania, Poland, and Romania still have to travel 200 kilometers or more to find a charger, we cannot expect them to be willing to buy an electric car. So it almost seems that, the EU is saying, yeah, get electric cars, get electric cars, yet there's no infrastructure there to support it, or infrastructure in some of the countries, like the Netherlands is like got a charger like every 3 feet. And Germany has lots of them as well, but in the other countries, it's not going so well. I mean, is this going to be an inhibitor there as well as here in terms of electric vehicle acceptance?
I think it's definitely going to be a factor. Here in the U.S., everybody seems to have access to a place to park their vehicle, whether it's in a garage or in a central garage for an apartment. And a lot of those can be wired for chargers, or there's large parking lots. We have space in this country. If you go to Europe, there's a lot of medieval walled cities where lots and lots of people live, and they have tiny little alleyways and ancient electrical systems and cobblestone roads, and people park kind of up on the curb, and you're not going to find chargers in places like that. And indeed, a lot of people just exist in those little towns and maybe go into the immediate towns there around there. So maybe you don't need big battery vehicles to do that. There's some of the little city runabouts, like I think it's Axiom that out of France that does those types of things, kind of like a Microlino. But of course, this is going to be an inhibitor. That's why Tesla has a big advantage globally so far. I think one of the main reasons is their supercharger network.
Yeah. Speaking of Tesla, we got to get into them too, but we got to take a quick commercial break, and we ought to talk about winding down internal combustion engine operations as well. But first, a shout out to the sponsors of the show.
The world is changing at an ever-increasing pace. No matter what the mode of transportation, there is always the need for an efficient propulsion system. And that's exactly what BorgWarner has been doing since the earliest days of the automotive industry. We create innovative mobility technologies that reduce energy consumption and emissions while improving performance. Our proven track record has made us an industry leader in forward-looking propulsion solutions for combustion, hybrid, and electric vehicles.
All right, we're back.
So John, you told me offline that you had met up with some folks who gave you some real insight on what Tesla's up to and how they are moving forward at a pace that other automakers are not nearly as agile or as quick.
Yeah, this is very interesting. I'm not going to mention the company because this was all given to me on background. But it was eye-opening. This is a company that does deep dives into vehicles for comparisons and benchmarking and that sort of thing. And one of the things that they showed me that really stuck out in my mind was the evolution of wiring harnesses. And I say wiring harnesses in, you think a bunch of copper and stuff like that. Today, of course, they're transmitting data and electricity and all kinds of things like that. But anyway, they showed me the wiring harness on the Model X and what it cost and all that. And then the Model 3, which just came a few years after the Model X, $300 cheaper for the wiring harness on the Model Y or the Model 3 compared to the Model X. And then the Model Y, which is built on the same architecture. I mean, it's built right off the Model 3. Different approach altogether, too. And in fact, it has far more capability than the Model 3 does. They've gone to a lot of aluminum wiring and an aluminum bus to get rid of copper, which is heavy and expensive. The price of copper is going through the roof as well. And, the point that these people were making to me is like, no traditional automaker would ever do this. They develop a wiring harness, and if it's like for pickups and SUVs, that goes in pickups and SUVs for the next 10 years and don't change a thing. And same for any other kind of line of vehicles, whether it's pass cars or crossovers. Once you get that thing designed, you build it in as much volume as you can and you don't touch a thing. One of the reasons why you don't touch it is, of course, you're going to add cost, but because anytime you change a design that's been validated and is at 6 Sigma and is reliable, you don't want to mess with it. If it ain't broke, don't fix it, because all you're going to introduce is variability, and variability leads to quality problems, and they lead to warranty costs. Tesla doesn't care about any of that stuff. It just makes changes on the fly. And the point that this guy, and they took me through several other systems in the car too, like the big castings.
Okay, but let's stick with this. Now, are you talking here about the electrical architecture? You're talking
Yes.
about the wires that connect the various sensors and processors and all of the stuff that goes into making vehicles operative and smart.
Right. That's it.
Okay. Okay. So, I mean, isn't it the case? I mean, you're talking about traditional OEMs. So, General Motors, and Chris, you probably know more about this than I certainly do, that General Motors developed a new electrical architecture, and it was used in the new Corvette, I believe, which I guess is not so new anymore. And
the Silverado and the Suburban.
Okay, so John, what you're talking about is something like that,
right?
But
And we're not just talking about wiring, and the spider web of wires that go out throughout the vehicle. We're talking about the places where it centralizes computing and the number of processors that are throughout the vehicle. And when GM went through that process, they greatly reduced the number of computers within the vehicle, centralizing processing power around it. But it still wasn't quite as radical as what John is talking about with Tesla. And I think that is, potentially a huge advantage for them. It's certainly a cost advantage. It's certainly a flexibility advantage that they're willing to just say, we've got this incremental improvement over here, let's run over here. But to John's point about quality, I mean, they have this approach about everything. And that's why Teslas tend to have industry trailing quality. Let's put it that way, whether it's build quality or other electrical issues. Like, we saw the widespread problems with screens because they didn't develop screens to an automotive standard because they were so busy doing other things or they didn't listen to the right people. So there's pros and cons here, but it is impressive that they're willing to kind of throw the baby out with the bathwater and continually iterate all the time or do clean sheet stuff on that kind of basis. I would think that the cost will eventually catch up with them, especially if Wall Street isn't giving them the flexibility for their valuation that they need in order to continue that kind of investment.
Could be, but Tesla went to centralized computing years ago.
Yeah.
Nobody else has caught up yet. I mean, GM, to your point, Gary, introduced this all new architecture with far more capability of what it can do in terms of processing data and the like. And to Chris's point, uses less discrete microprocessors because they've got these modules around the car. Well, Tesla doesn't have the modules like that. Ford, too, has an all new architecture that debuted on the Mach-E, is on the new F-150 as well. In both GM and Ford's cases, this is what has allowed them to do over-the-air updates. but their latest stuff still hasn't caught up to what Tesla did 10 years ago. And Tesla's going beyond what it did. And the point is that with these new iterations that it's doing, whether it's like this new architecture for electronics or with the big castings front and rear that it's using on the Model Y.
All right, explain that a little bit. What these castings do, and you know, I mean, for someone who just hears castings, they think, what's the big deal there?
You know, the typical front and rear end of a car unit body is made up of dozens of different stampings. I mean, sure, you see the hood and the fenders and the trunk lid and that sort of thing. But underneath that, there's the wheel wells and there's cross members and there's the floor pan and there's all kinds of brackets and other things. And each and every one of those has got to be designed. It's got to be tooled. It's got to be stamped out. It's got to be fixtured. It's got to be welded. And so what Tesla said was, you know, look, why don't we just make one piece casting that replaces dozens of stampings, both front and rear end. And so, boom, this thing comes out of the die, it's done. I mean, you don't have to do anything more. So from a total cost standpoint, the castings are expensive. The machines that make the castings are really expensive. But when you offset all these individual stampings and all the dies that go into them and all the welding that goes into it, net of net, it's a cost reduction. It's an assembly time reduction as well. So you can build the car faster at lower cost. And that's what these guys that I met at the Munich Auto Show were driving into my head, is that Tesla is moving at much faster speed than all the automakers. And it's doing this to drive down costs. And what these guys were telling me, I'm not sure I totally believe it yet, but there's no way that the traditional OEMs can catch up doing things the way that they're doing them.
Chris, you've met innumerable people in the auto industry, and I'm sure your experience has been like mine. And most of these people seem to be pretty damn smart. And you talk to them about whatever it is their sphere of knowledge, their sphere of influence, and you know they know what's going on. So, given what John heard, I mean, why do you think these smart guys who work at Stellantis or who work at General Motors or who work at Ford or who work at Toyota or work at Honda, I mean, why aren't they doing these things?
Well, they're big legacy companies, and they've got legacy processes in place. And I mean, you remember the example from Ford versus Ferrari of passing the envelope around 1 million times before it got to the CEO's desk. That stuff still sort of happens. You got to go through legal, you got to get this approved and all that. And we see it on our side of the business, just trying to get information for a vehicle that's coming out in a couple of weeks, and the various automakers are like, well, we won't have the information for you, until a couple of days prior, because it's got to go through all these checks and all that, and you can't imagine how difficult that is. They'll tell us kind of on background. I think a lot of that's very true. That absolutely is an issue. What I'm curious about is, I don't think Tesla is the only company that will be doing those sorts of processes in the future. It may be harder for legacy companies to catch up, but what are the Lucids doing? What are the Rivians doing? How far along in those sorts of processes are they? Will they catch up? Do they have something new that's even ahead of where Tesla is? Because a lot of those people came from Tesla. So those are the things that I'm interested in seeing. And I think that, for the average person that looks at Tesla and is enthralled by the acceleration and the infotainment and the idea of electric propulsion, and there really hasn't been very many competitors, even in the ballpark in terms of acceleration or range or any of those other things. Some of that lead seems to be diminishing, or quite a bit of that lead seems to be diminishing right now. And the other automakers, I believe, have better quality. So I wonder if there's going to be a potential period for catch up in certain regards in terms of public perception, and or that, the youngsters of tomorrow don't want to drive what their dad drove in the future, which was a Tesla. And so that there may be an opportunity there that's recognized in the stock price and yada, yada, yada. You end up with Tesla isn't as cool as it used to be. And there are all these other new competitors, or there are other vehicles from legacy automakers that basically do the similar thing, but with higher quality.
But John, are you
Hold on,
suggesting that
one sec. Carmen just posted something from the chat room. Marcus Miller writes in to say that the castings on the Tesla Model Y replace 70 different metal parts? 70. Now you figure typical stamping, you're probably looking at 3 to 4 die sets per part. This is scaring the hell out of the tooling industry. I talked with Lori Harbour about this at the management briefing seminars. She said those castings scare the hell out of the tool and die industry because they believe that the rest of the industry is going to have to follow Tesla in this regard, and it's going to wipe out all kinds of dies. It's going to take away a significant part of their business.
those big casting dies, though, John, are not cheap. So
no, they're not. No, you're right.
They're gonna hit. There's going to be some business there. But okay, I want to get back to Chris made the point that Tesla is going to lose some of its luster going forward, and that there are these companies like Rivian, like Lucid, that are going to be perhaps taking some of that space away in terms of vehicle amenities and performance and so on, and that there's the possibility of them being likely to use the sort of technology and thinking that Tesla's using. What I want to know from you, John, is whether you think that people at the traditional companies are going to be able to keep up with these new entrants, or whether their share is going to diminish over time. It sort of seems to be turning the innovator's dilemma on its head. So rather than having something that is cheap and working its way up, something that is underperforming what exists out there now, these guys are all coming out with things that overperform. Okay, so a Tesla overperforms compared to any car out there otherwise, right? But it's a whole mindset shift that's necessary, to say nothing of tooling and equipment, which I think can lead us into this discussion of the waning of the ICE.
Yeah. So yeah, I mean, that's a whole show in itself, your question, Gary. It's really good. Look at what Ford just did. They went out and hired this guy, I think his name's Doug Field from Apple, who also worked at Tesla before that, who is going to report directly to Jim Farley, the CEO of Ford. I mean, to me, this is number one, what the traditional automakers have got to do. Go out and get talent from the outside that's been there and done that. Go out and get talent like from Apple that we know is working on its own electric car. Number one, you steal one of their best guys away. And now you get to learn everything that Apple was doing. And, there might be some legal niceties of how you have to tiptoe around learning that sort of stuff, but they're going to learn it. And so you've got to bring in new people who are not wedded to the old culture, not at all wedded to the new process or the old processes. And that's what you've got to do, is change your processes. It's not like just talking to your people and saying, we've got to be more innovative and, agile. That doesn't work. You got to change processes. You got to change the way that you recognize and reward your people. There's that old adage, tell me how you're going to measure my performance, and I'll show you how I'm going to perform. Okay,
but a friend of mine is a good friend of Doug Field, and I've had the opportunity to meet Doug. And everybody's concentrating on Apple. That's the wrong thing to look at. He worked at Tesla. Okay, he worked at Segway with Dean Kamen. Okay,
right.
So he worked for Dean Kamen, who, and I look at Dean Kamen as being Elon Musk before there's Elon Musk, but actually Dean is a very pleasant man and a very imaginative person. But but the thing that I wonder about is that it's one thing to hire someone. It's another thing to allow this person to do what this person knows how to do. And Chris, for those who are watching or listening to the podcast, you're shaking your finger like I'm got something there.
You do. You have to create a culture that empowers people like that to, give them the platforms to make change. It's one thing to hire and have people observe and bang their head against the walls and then go on to another automaker and do the same thing over again. It's another to allow them to do those sorts of things. And I think some of the most successful products that we've seen out of mainstream automakers, they're very focused, and they're maybe not like big volume plays, but they're the skunk works type projects that happen after hours, that happen in the unmarked basement rooms. They're the the Dodge Demons and the Ford GTs. Again, these are not high-tech vehicles, but they're very focused, and they're things that happen largely outside of corporate processes. They need to figure out what makes those vehicles possible, what make them so successful, and then try and open up those avenues for other bigger, more mainstream projects.
So John, let's move on to this issue. You wrote a piece about the amount of investment that's necessary by the traditional OEMs, because they're the ones who are having to shift their process from making engines and transmissions to electric motors to less sophisticated transmissions. And you have a solution to what these people must do in order to have enough capital to move forward in these new technologies. Talk about that.
Yeah. So, yeah, I'm not going to say necessarily it's a solution. It's definitely a suggestion. But my argument is that all the automakers of the world make engines and transmissions that are exactly the same in displacement or awfully close. And they make transmissions with the same number of gears in them. And, certainly in the US market, the average consumer has no clue what's under the hood. They don't care. As long as it starts up every single time, it runs well, gets decent fuel economy, is easy on the pocketbook in terms of maintenance. That's all they care about. So what I'm saying, and I focused on the Detroit 3. This could apply in Europe. It could apply in Japan just as easily. Outsource all their powertrain. Get rid of it. Now, hear me out a little bit before that. For enthusiasts who care very deeply about their powertrain, whether it's the Ford Coyote or Voodoo engines or the LS or the LT at General Motors or the Hellcat at Chrysler, do not outsource that. Those customers care. Make sure that you deliver exactly what they want. But for the 90% rest of the market who doesn't even know what's under their hood, they should form a separate company and let that company build all the 2-liter engines that they need, all the 2.5 liters, all the 1.6 liter turbos, all the 9 speeds, whatever it is. And let that company, this standalone company, this cannot be a collaborative effort. Because if they all try to collaborate, they're all going to argue ours is the best, and they'll have those arguments for years. What they should do is outsource all of this, form a separate company, and let it build all the engines and transmissions for the big three. Keep in mind, in North America alone, they make 9 million powertrains a year. So this new company would have far more economy of scale than the three of them do. It could sell engines and transmissions back to them cheaper than they could make it themselves. And with the savings of not having to continue to invest billions in powertrain, maybe they're not doing clean sheet engines anymore. But look, let's get real. Piston engines are going to be around for years to come. Yeah, and they're going to have to invest in making sure that they have lower emissions and better fuel economy. So there will be investments. Let this new company do it. Take the savings, pour it into electrification, into BEVs specifically.
What do you think, Chris?
I think it's an interesting idea. I wonder if companies would be reluctant to do that because of how long they view the timeline of the internal combustion engine as being a viable thing. But to your point, I too believe that the piston engine will be around for quite a long time. So there may be that horizon, but we were just talking about institutional inertia and how difficult it is to get big companies to change. I think this would be, even if it's in their best interest, a very difficult thing to convince them of. What I think is interesting is that we're talking about this in the context of ICE engines as opposed to electric vehicles, because when we talk about ICE engines, we talk about certain engine configurations and the sound characteristics that they create and the smoothness that they have and all that. And yes, we're car geeks, and most of the world doesn't care about that. But when we talk about electric motors, we just treat them like little boxes, and we just say it has this output and in terms of horsepower and this amount of torque. We don't there's no romance around, the magnets or the rotor core or the wiring. Like I don't know that much about them, to be perfectly honest with you. And I'm a journalist, and I would guess that that's probably true for most of the rest of the industry. And I would guess that consumers really don't care because there's not the varying sound characteristics in an appreciable fashion. So I think that's the kind of stuff that could be commonized across the industry going forward. And maybe an approach like what you're talking about for ICE stuff could also apply to electric motors.
Yeah,
So
possibly.
that actually might be even more interesting, because if there is very little difference, and a lot of the difference in terms of the performance of an electric vehicle is predicated on software, not on the hardware itself. And so, you could be BMW and have the code operate that motor in a certain way, and you could be Volkswagen and have it operate in a different way. So if you do it, what you're suggesting, Chris, that would save them going forward a whole lot of money. And John, to your point, do you remember that plant in Dundee, Michigan, the engine plant, the GEMA engine plant, which was Daimler, Mitsubishi, and Hyundai?
And Chrysler.
Well, but that was when Daimler was Daimler Chrysler.
Yeah, right.
But or General Motors working with Ford on the 10-speed transmission, and this was going to be one, and it seems like it became two separate things. I mean, I just don't know how you can work this.
Well, that's why I say it has to be standalone. If it's collaborative, like GM and Ford collaborating on a 9-speed transmission, all they do is argue all the time. Oh no, our idea is better, and so they collaborated, I'm told, on a transmission that is processed completely differently. Right. So they never achieved the savings that they set out to do. That's why you can't do this collaboratively. And, here's my thinking. Look, we can argue how long the piston engine is going to be around, but you've got, Europe and China. I mean, they're going headstrong into BEVs. And, we can say whether it's 2030, I don't believe that, that's going to be the date when ICE goes away. 2035, it's not going to be then. 2040, you're starting to talk. We're going to get there. Why wait? By combining all their powertrain operations in one standalone company that gets rid of all this duplication, all the engineering, all the design work that goes into it, all the ITP, everything, all the research, you can commonize all that. You can start saving billions right now. So if you're going to get there anyway, why wait? Go for the savings right now.
So John, isn't this sort of like suggesting that all ice cream become vanilla?
No, because you'll still give the customer what they want. And like I said, for the 10% of enthusiasts who really care, don't you do my idea. Keep that stuff in-house. Greatly, reduced in terms of the footprint from manufacturing and engineering and all that. But for the 90% of the market that really doesn't care whatsoever, go for it.
Well, actually, I think your 10% is way, way exaggerated.
Way high, you mean?
Yes. So basically, again, what you're saying is you make a little bit of rocky road and the rest is vanilla.
Well, I'm not just saying vanilla. I mean, you're going to have 1.6 liter turbos and 2 liter naturally aspirated and 3 liter V6s. And so you're going to give them what they need. Years ago, who was the guy that ran GM powertrain? Tom Stevens. And he said, look, an engine, from the way I have to look at it, is a box. The program manager comes to me and he says, Tom, I need a box that is this dimension. It's this wide, it's this tall, and it fits in this space. It's got to weigh this much, and it's got to put out this kind of power, and it has to deliver this kind of fuel economy and meet this kind of emissions. So give me a box that does that. And that's all you're going to do for that 90% plus of the market that doesn't care. You're going to give them the box that does the job they need.
See, but I think I make the best box. Chris thinks he makes the best box. And of course, you think you make the best box.
Right. Of course. And that's why I say it has to go to, maybe outsource it to Cummins, for example. They make engines all day long. Wouldn't they love to take all this over and run it? And now they're going to have so much manufacturing volume and they're going to be able to sell you your own engine at a lower cost than that you could make it.
And it might be better engineered if you're doing it at that scale. You could throw more money at the development to make a better engine for everybody.
It's a thought. I'm just throwing a hand grenade into the mix here and see what happens.
See, but Chris, don't you think this is going to be an ever decreasing volume for these internal combustion engines going forward?
Well, yeah, of course. I mean, we know that that's happening, even if it's through legislation, that the internal combustion engine has a timeline on it. We don't know what that timeline is, and I think it's a lot longer than a lot of legislators are leading us to believe right now, and a lot of non-car media people would like us to believe. But there is a timeline on it for sure. Whether it's worth that kind of investment, I'm not sure.
Yeah, look, Volvo's already done what I've talked about. They just spun off their entire powertrain operations into a joint venture with Geely, their parent company, and everything. The engineers, the research people, the IT people, everything, boom, spun the whole thing off because they're claiming they're going to be fully electric by 2030. So their timeline, their horizon is very clear and defined. Cadillac, same thing. Cadillac says it's going to be all electric by 2030, and there's some other brands out there too. So we know this is going to happen. And I argue that you can save billions as an automaker. So what are you waiting for?
But if I'm General Motors, I look at it from the point of view of perhaps the way that Geely's looking at it. Okay, so General Motors says, well, you know what? I have this thing called GM Propulsion Systems, and GM Propulsion Systems is going to be making the powertrains for the Chevys and the Buicks and the GMCs, huge volume, big volume, right? And we will share among those, and then Cadillac will be gone. Okay, that's reducing it, so we're not going to be making it for them. So Geely's looking at it from the point of view of, well, we have this division called Volvo, right? Volvo is Chevy. We'll make their engines, no problem.
Why not? Why not?
I mean, how is that different than it exists right now? General Motors makes engines and sells them to its brands. Ford, well, it's less with just Lincoln, but I'm sitting there on Mary Barra and I'm like, well, I've got all these engine plants. It'll cost me a whole lot of money to get rid of these. I got all this sunk costs. I'll just build them.
Yeah, well, it wouldn't cost her anything to spin them off. And I believe if they spun off their ICE powertrains, their stock would jump on the news. All three of them.
I think you're probably right about that. It would be an outside acknowledgement, even to people that are only peripherally paying attention to the industry, that there's an acknowledgement of change, of process, and of what's future powertrains.
Wall Street would reward them because it would say, this is a depreciating asset that you have that is never going to provide the return that it did in the past. And it's not going to require any more investment. And it's going to free up money to put into electric cars, connectivity, all the other stuff that's going to grow your top and bottom line. So it would be great, so says Wall Street, in my opinion, to see you getting rid of this 19th century technology and putting it into the 21st century.
But isn't that sort of like Wall Street rewarding companies whenever they lay people off?
Well,
anybody?
People are going to lose their jobs that work in powertrain now anyway. We know that internal combustion engine sales and the transmissions that go with them they're just going to continue to lose market share for years.
So I guess the question though becomes, how long does someone say, we're gonna ride that horse until it's on its knees?
Well, Gary, you've heard me say this. There's nothing wrong with that strategy. There's nothing wrong with saying, look, we see the sunset, we know where the end of the business is, but between now and then, we can make a lot of money. And that's not a bad strategy. Why not?
I think
make
they have
a
an
bunch
obligation. Yeah, I think, publicly traded companies have an obligation to continue to make money. So if you're Ford and the F-150 is your cash cow, you continue to churn out F-150s with gas engines, but you use those proceeds to turn around and develop the Lightning or what's after the Lightning or what's after the Lightning's Lightning. You have to do that. And so people that are just armchair critics and say like, well, Ford should be all electric right now. They're not paying attention to, to how these companies make money and what their obligations are.
Right.
All right, so we're coming to the bottom of the top of the show, the end of the show. Chris, say something interesting about a car, because we've been talking about all this manufacturing stuff and people may be like falling out of their chairs.
My Jeep Grand Wagoneer has a $2,000 delivery fee, which just blows my mind. Maybe it's not about the vehicle itself, but it absolutely blows my mind that it costs that much money to deliver that vehicle.
John, you've been a critic of those.
I'm with Chris all the way. I think it should be illegal to post the price of a car in an ad that does not include the destination charges. You cannot buy that vehicle without them. So you're really lying about what it costs to buy it. And, automakers use these destination charges to squeak under a number that they want to be able to advertise. So make up a number, it's under 50 grand. Yeah. Until you add the destination charge. But, people see that, it's only $49,995. And to me, it should be illegal. I'm actually surprised that the Federal Trade Commission hasn't cracked down on this. I don't know of any other product that says, here's what it costs until you add this and then it costs more. And so to me, it's blatantly illegal.
All right, Chris. So the $2,000 aside, how is that vehicle?
It's something I've only had since I got back from Germany yesterday. So I haven't had a ton of time to drive it. It has a gorgeous interior that looks very expensive. And in the places that I've driven it, I've literally had people walk by the vehicle and go, damn. And I mean, absolutely, literally, I'm actually floored by that. And it happened in a couple of different instances. I came back to the vehicle after going inside the grocery store, and my better half, she said, somebody just walked with the vehicle, didn't realize I was in it, and was like gawking and saying amazing things about it. I got to be honest with you. I like the front end fine. I think the back end of this vehicle looks awful. I think it looks like a minivan that they've outlined with chrome trim to emphasize the window line and all that. I think it doesn't look very, very off-roady Jeep-like, but it does look expensive in this premium trim, which, as I alluded to, it's 108 grand. So it is the top flight model. So it really should be that way. But the interior is impressive. The tech is impressive.
Might one not make the argument that, you said that the interior looks expensive? I mean, perhaps the interior just simply is expensive?
It probably is. There's certainly a lot of it. It's a big vehicle. There's a lot of leather in there. Yeah,
see, it doesn't come cheap. They got to get all those cows and,
they got at least an extra half a cow.
Okay, let's wrap this up.
Yeah.
So
Chris, thanks for coming back on. Great to have you again.
Appreciate it.
Great to be here. Thank you as always, both of you.
Good seeing you, Gary. And
all right, John.
Let's do it again next week.
All right, we'll do that. Thank you, everyone.
Take care, everyone. Yeah.
Autoline After Hours is brought to you by Bridgestone Tires, solutions for your journey, and by Borg Warner, propulsion solutions that support a clean, energy-efficient world.
Visit our website, Autoline.tv, where you can watch us live Thursday afternoons. Get your daily fix with Autoline Daily and in-depth analysis and interviews with Autoline This Week. There's all that and much more at Autoline.tv.